Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio. Now, this is the fourth upload in the series I've been doing on Lauren Agee and her mysterious death in 2015 at Wakefest. I did one upload where we sort of played devil's advocate, arguing that this was a murder committed by Aaron Lilly and Chris Stout. But in this particular one, we're going to kind of view it as the opposite side of the coin, that this was just an accidental death. And maybe the guys were involved with moving her body in some way, but, well, let's get right to it. For starters, we don't necessarily know that. And, you know, one of the biggest things that everybody has to bear in mind when we're dealing with true crime cases is some things can happen that are unexpected, and some things can happen are, you know, unforeseen, but they happen anyway, and we don't always understand them very well. I was listening to Noam Chomsky once, and he said that, you know, coincidence, contradiction, and the unexplained are all part of life. And, you know, that's just the end of it. You know, like, so just because, you know, you find someone's body not exactly where you expected it to be, that does not equate with murder. That does not necessarily mean that somebody has murdered them. And Sheila Wysocki has really gone into a lot of the things about Lauren's injuries, you know, saying that her feet would have been more damaged if she had been, you know, fallen off the cliff accidentally as opposed to only having one major cut. Well, what I would say to that is not necessarily, for those same three reasons that we brought up before, coincidence, contradiction, and the unexplained. It's like, just because you don't have an explanation for something like that, that is not definitive certainty. I mean, there could be an explanation that's very simple. We just haven't discovered it yet. Also, she goes into some injuries about how Lauren's nose was broken. Well, that isn't exactly proof of anything. That just means that, you know, somebody fell off a cliff and broke their nose. I mean, there could be so many things that are associated with that. Alright, so, what do we really want to know about this? Lauren's blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit, which I believe they mean to be 0.16, 0.16. And we talked about this in the first upload. When someone is around a body of water, or maybe it was the second, sorry. When someone's around a body of water and they're disoriented, the risk of death is so much higher. Well, that's exactly what happened. And, you know, somebody died under mysterious circumstances when they were around a body of water. So this is I think one of the reasons why the investigators really have not done anything to seriously pursue Chris and Aaron and Hannah, because the definitive physical evidence just doesn't seem to be there. And if the definitive physical evidence is not there, it's not likely that they are implicated in this. And if you have heard any of my uploads before, maybe you've heard me say this phrase, being weird is not a crime. So many times in true crime, we get this sort of incident where people are like, hey, they were showing a lot of signs of suspicious behavior, and then it turns out that this is just something completely different. Hello, Amanda Knox? I mean, I always bring her up as an example about people really didn't like her behavior after the death of her roommate. Well, that turned out to be something rather different. And that could be the case, you know, with Chris and Aaron. The investigators were really bothered by their behavior, but guess what? There's not a manual on how to act and how to respond to tragedy. As far as Aaron and Chris's behavior about the location of Lauren's body, what I really believe is they were in a canoe that was right by a houseboat. They're kind of hanging on to the houseboat, and they believed that they saw something from a far distance that they thought could possibly be Lauren's body. But they almost didn't want to disturb the scene, but for the sole fact that they did not know what to do. Once again, you know, like, that's a judgment call. You might not think like that, and I might not think like that. I mean, you would probably think something like, hey, let's try and get help, or let's at least, you know, approach the scene and find out if it's true or not. But once again, being weird is not a crime. Being different is not a crime. Thinking differently is not a crime. So one of the big things associated with Lauren's injuries is there was no water in the lungs. Lauren died from blunt force trauma and possibly dry drowning, which I believe is when, like the passageway closes, so just no water can get in, and it's called dry drowning. So those are the two things that contributed to her death, so... I mean, Lauren did sustain a lot of blunt force trauma, but is there any definitive way to tie DNA to Chris and to Aaron? I mean, did they find any of Lauren's blood on their clothes? Did they find Chris's blood on her? Did they find Aaron's blood on her? If he was striking her in the face or something with his fist, wouldn't there be some more of that around? And if there's not, then we just have to look at it from this way. There is no evidence. I repeat, if we look at it that way, there is no evidence. I mean, okay, the investigators did not conduct a rape kit, right? And some people are horribly critical of them. Even I think that was not a good idea. They did not conduct a rape kit, but it's that only weakens the argument, against Chris and Aaron. There is no physical evidence. And us now, in 2018, the time of this recording, we would just be hey, that's not evidence for or against anything. It's there is very little physical evidence that actually shows us that Chris and Aaron were involved in the taking of Lauren's life. Yes, do they seem suspicious? And yes, they seem like they had that sort of robotic personality when they were being questioned. But that does not make somebody a murderer. And I even brought up the possibility in the first segment that I would attribute some of that to Aaron's dominant personality. It really seems like Aaron was kind of like the leader of the pack. And it was actually Aaron that was, the one who kind of rescued Lauren after she did the cliff dive. I mentioned in one of the uploads when I thought that there was still the possibility that her cliff dive didn't happen based on her comments, that the comments that her mother had made. But then I began, to invest. I mean, I watched another Sheila Wysocki interview, and she said that, an independent witness came forward and said, yes, Lauren did indeed jump, and she had the wind knocked out of her. We don't know if she hit her head or not 100%, because there's that big theory that she hit her head and that caused some type of slow brain bleed that would have led to disorientation. Whether she did or not, it was Aaron who actually, was the first one to help her. I mean, they described it as she had the wind knocked out of her, and Aaron Lilly was the one to help her. So it's that doesn't exactly sound like someone who's then going to murder you 12 hours later or whatever it was. Maybe it was 6 or 7 hours later or something. I don't know about that. That's a very large stretch. Some of the other things, though, that we would put around this. Even if we get rid of the head injury, we get rid of the cliff dive, get rid of all that, Lauren's blood alcohol level was 0.16. Or at the least, the way they describe it, twice the legal limit. Lauren's BAC was twice the legal limit. That gives us the kind of impression that, she was disoriented, around a cliff, around a body of water, horribly dangerous things going on. Did Lauren fall out of a hammock? No, I don't think so. Absolutely not, because of the tests done by Chris Yarchuk and the dummy test. I think that's pretty much taken care of. And I don't, because, people were really insinuating that she was just sleeping in a hammock, possibly even with Chris Stout, and then something happened and she fell out and then tumbled into the water. No, I mean, in reality, that is most likely not what happened. What a more realistic possibility is, Lauren got up in the middle of the night. Why? I don't know. Maybe it had to do with the fact that she was completely drunk, and then she wandered over near a different cliffside that was closer to the water, perhaps where she did the cliff jump, and then she tumbled and fell into the water. as much as Sheila Wysocki can talk, you cannot predict the injuries that someone would have sustained if they had fallen, into the water. And you say that that's not enough bodily damage. I mean, she died from blunt force trauma. Whatever it was killed her, or at the very least, it could have caused the dry drowning. It's like, I don't necessarily think that Sheila has put forth a strong enough case to say that that was not an accident. And what we have is a group of people who did not know what to do. They didn't know how to react. They probably got really shocked. They probably got really scared. Just the whole notion that at first your friend's missing and you see something floating in the water. There's not a rule book on how to behave in life. If there were, things like this would not happen, or at the very least they would happen in more precise terms, where you would never just have these giant question marks around people's behavior, which is what we have with Chris Stout and Aaron Lilly. It's just so much of the thing has been placed on them because people just don't understand their behavior. It's like attacking their character as opposed to the physical evidence. In the physical evidence, they have absolutely zero that she was attacked by these two guys. They have zero evidence that she was actually involved in any sort of physical altercation. No one can prove that they threw her off the cliff. No one can prove that they physically assaulted her. No one can prove that they sexually assaulted her. I mean, do they have any sort of things like fingernail? Do they have any sort of hand marks around the neck that could be somehow come back to Aaron or Chris? Where is that sort of stuff in a murder investigation? What's this whole notion about there's a triangle shape on her chest that most likely came from a canoe? I just have to throw that out completely. I mean, some people think that, because that just doesn't make sense. They would have found blood evidence in a canoe if that had been the case, or, if that had been done the way that they were insinuating, that they had put her face down in the canoe and left her feet hanging over the edge. What in the world is that? That is just preposterous. Even in a distressed state of mind, people are going to be aware, oh yeah, let's take somebody's bleeding face and drop it in the front of a canoe. Unlikely. Excuse me for getting a little long-winded with my ramblings, but what has most likely happened is Lauren Agee was intoxicated, and she might have been disoriented even from something associated with her cliff dive. She got out in the middle of the night, and something led to her falling off the cliff. And we don't necessarily know what that was, but we know she had a lot of alcohol in her system. And, has anyone ever entertained the possibility that Lauren survived the fall and was able to move in the water to a certain extent, and that's why she ended up in the second cove? I mean, there could be very, very simple explanations that do not involve any of the three people, Hannah, Chris, and Aaron, at all. So we can't immediately jump to the conclusion that there was a murder in that particular instance. Because as of now, the physical evidence does not support it. Alright, well that's my little bit of devil's advocate, just playing the sort of counter-argument to whether or not Lauren Agee was murdered or this was an accidental death. What do you think? Do you have anything to say at all? I hope you have heard part 3 where I discussed the possibility that this was a murder, and the reason why we do things like this is just to hear both sides of the story, and maybe somebody will think what sounds better, what makes sense, what doesn't. If you have anything to say at all, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear something from you. Thank you for listening, and until next time.